Welcome back to Story Deep Dive with Dana and Rachel. This is a podcast with book coaches who are editors and also besties, where we discuss books not as readers, but as writers to draw inspiration from great books and lots of laughs. Y'all, we are already, our funny bone has been activated. We have been recording all day. So let me just forewarn you, because we are not stopping. We're going to keep this show going. And so we are coming back this week for editors' takes for our current selection, which is Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. And we are enjoying the story, having our pre-show conversations are way too long, as if we're not exhausted.
I was going to say, it's just making the day longer and longer and longer.
As if we don't realize this, but you know what? It's worth it. We're doing it for you. So if you are new here, welcome. If you are back, welcome back. And today we're going to talk about our editor's takes. But before that, it is sort of like a little tradition. I think, would you call it a tradition?
I think by now we've done it enough weeks in a row or enough months in a row.
Yeah, I think so. That we talk about our next selection. And so if you're new around here, you may not know that we alternate roughly selections that we pick. And the next selection is my pick, which is Tempt Me at Twilight by Lisa. I'm not going to say her last name. Do you know how to say her last name?
I have a guess. Kleypas.
Come on. We'll go with that.
I haven't looked up any. So normally what I'll do is I'll look up an interview with the author so I can hear them say their own name. Haven't done that for Lisa just yet. Lisa, we love you. Sorry. But it will be done before, because I have to, because it's your pick. So I got to host. So I'm going to be looking that up. But it looks to me just like it's phonetic Kleypas or maybe Kleypas. So anyway, Tempt Me at Twilight by Lisa Kleypas.
Okay, she's gonna spell it, girl.
I can spell it better than I can say it.
Girl, you sound like us in spelling snack for our dogs. Because if you say the word, it is over. So, it is my pick, and this is one of my all-time favorite novels. I was telling Rachel earlier that I think it's going to be interesting reading it after the books that we've read before, because usually sort of when you're in this container, you are looking at it against what we've talked about before in other conversations that we had. And so one of the things that makes this book different than any of our previous books is that it is a historical romance. Mm-hmm. And so this is going to be, this is going to be our second. Because we did Beverly Jenkins.
Indigo is historical. This is our first Regency romance.
Regency, exactly. Totally your first Regency. And this particular book I've personally always loved because of the main male character. I love the female main character, but the main male character to me is sort of like your first rendition of a morally gray main male character. Because he is not the norm. He is not the polished a nobleman. He does not play by the rules, and he reminds me of your newer version of your bad boy billionaire sort of vibe. And so it makes for a very great read. The female protagonist, her name is Poppy, and Poppy she just wants a regular normal life because her family is so abnormal, and she just wants regular. She doesn't want excitement. She doesn't want all the things. She just wants a regular life. And she ends up, I think his name is Harry. She ends up saddled to Harry, and Harry is he is all of the things. And he's going to give Poppy a run for her money. So you get a little bit of funny. You do get, I think, I don't read a lot of Regency, so I'm not going to pretend like I know all about Regency, but you do get a lot of darker areas because you're sort of intersecting with, he's an ex-soldier. And so some of those things, but overall it makes for an enjoyable, funny read. They have everything. It opens up with her chasing a ferret.
Yes.
And their family just trying their absolute best not to get kicked out of this hotel, because they know how to get kicked out of a hotel because they are very non-traditional family. And so it's one of those that I keep in rotation and I read often. And so I always am like, I don't know how Rachel gonna like this book.
I feel like when you just say, here is just a regular old romance, I'm like, dope. Great. Like I like plain old, like just like romance that's like it sets out to be romance and that's what we're doing. I feel like I always respond better to those because I know what it's trying to do versus
Yes.
sometimes when you mix other elements in. Like that's obviously very common in romance, but then I'm also really looking at like right if we're looking at like thriller elements or something like that or fantasy elements, I'm really really looking at those because they're there. And then sometimes I'm like wait, uh, and it's still a romance, but right. So like, if you just put a romance in front of me, usually I'm like, this is great. It's just when you start introducing other stuff that I'm thinking you're setting expectations that you're not, and then I'm like, oh no, now I'm confused. Oh no.
Basically, Rachel's a tough audience. No, I think I've stopped wondering if I can predict whether she likes it. I'm starting to know better. But I can say this. I think this is one of those that if you're ever looking for comms and you're looking for certain tropes where you kind of want to see like underneath it, and I think that's a really good one. Like to me, I don't think we did the Anna Wang. I was gonna say, and we've done Beautifully Cruel.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was going to say, like, have we done a lot of morally gray main male characters? I always like to go to an older book that just hasn't distorted a
Yeah.
particular trope or kind of story structure just to see it almost in like a pure form. Because this one is sort of like, he's not just trying to be bad for bad's sake. And it's not even bad. It's just that he is who he is, and he's utterly fascinated by her. And of course, that's something that I always love.
What's not to love when a guy is just taken with a woman? I mean, when are you not gonna love that?
I love it
in a romance context, because obviously, if we're in a stalker scenario, this is not fun anymore. But
well, I have one that I would tell you about that too. Okay, but I think getting something that feels like it's almost as if you're trying to do something in pure form, and it's not possible, right? But it is helpful to see, especially if you are somebody wanting to write a story, and you will find, or my experience has been, I will work with people that want to write a particular trope, but they don't like how it's being interpreted currently. And my thing is usually, well, be careful. Because the reason why it's usually interpreted that way is because this is what readers are really loving. So sometimes looking at it in its air quote sort of a pure form helps you to see what are the nuances that makes this particular trope sing. And then what you begin to do is start playing with those levers. And it may not go to the extreme of like a twisted love. Right? It may not go to that extreme, but it will be in its own. And then when you have something like a regency, you're already sort of confined by societal norms and things like that are squarely in place. So it also helps to sort of rope that in. And so I like looking at things like that. And then when you just throw in this whimsical and starting with a fairy, if you're me, you get comfortable in the corner of the couch. You make sure that your coffee or tea is coming up on repeat from whoever loves you in your household. Because sometimes it's like that. Go ahead and get your man, get your child, somebody. And you just get to sit in listen, I used to always tell my family, okay, this is the time for mom to be invisible. That was my thing. I'm being invisible. They would let me sit on the couch. They'd take turns switching out my beverages. They'd bring me snacks.
Oh, amazing.
And I'm just like, let me just be invisible until the book is done. Baby, when the last page was closed, I would get pounced, but I would take it because I got a chance to read. So I think it will be. I think it'll be different than what we've done.
Mm-hmm.
You will get a lot of, because it's Regency, you'll get a lot of sort of historical context of that time.
Yeah.
There are they touch on some things like the advancement of technology. You also
Mm-hmm.
get the norms of when it comes to dating, courting, all of that, which is
Yeah.
a norm. But I think more than anything, it's his story and his sort of crossing with hers, and his
Mm.
being the sort of rough around the edges sort of man, and her almost being not necessarily pure and innocent, but she's just wanting to live a simple life. And
Yeah.
living that life with him is absolutely impossible because it's
Yeah.
just not how he rolls. And so you just watch this almost like a perfect storm, this clashing. But you also see how he's infatuated with her, and she's like, she likes it, but she's just like, but I want normal. And you're not
Yeah.
normal.
Yeah.
So that tug of war. And there's also technically like a love triangle.
Yeah, I can't wait to find out what's going to happen with that because so this I don't think this counts as a spoiler because it's literally in the second chapter. Like this, there's someone there's a love letter and she's writing to some guy named Michael, and I'm like, I see who the love interest is. What's gonna happen to this guy?
Exactly.
So I'm already like on the hook for like, well, he seems nice, normal, kind of dorky, which seems like a good vibe for her.
Right. Right up Poppy's lane, girl.
Man,
and then,
what's gonna happen?
Okay, so here's the thing that is so amazing about romance, is the fact that when you understand that we all know the end, we all know how this story ends. You are not trying to surprise us there. The surprise is how are you going to get us there. So when you see the letter and you know about then you turn the book over and you're like, well, wait a minute. His name is not Michael.
It's not Michael.
That sounds like the good setup for what had happened was. What had happened was a moment. And so you just see it right off the bat. And it also helps you to sort of have this thing of how you build your characters. How do you make it so that even though your characters can seem totally opposite, that you write them in such a way that it shows it inevitably that there's something about this person that they are made for this person. And that's the thing that if you're not like in love or romance that you miss, but it is something that you want to be able to do in a way that doesn't just seem obvious, but there will be things that are on the page, moments that are on the page where you just are like, oh, this is going to be good. And so that's how I feel.
That's something that I love about studying romance. I think romance is amazing for studying, like for me, who works largely with non-romance writers, sending them in the direction. Maybe we'll find a sweet romance, maybe something that's not quite so sexy, depending on what they would like to read or not read. But getting to explore characters and the things that shape characters and make them the way that they are, right? The way that the forces of their life have shaped them. That's something that romance does really well because it's a romance essential, basically. Like you kind of don't have a romance without having developed these aspects, because the romance is a part of like them experiencing wholeness and getting wounds exposed and then sort of properly treated so they can engage love. So like this is such an essential to the genre that it makes it a really great place to look for that kind of exploration, to see how characters, again, how you form characters and how they're shaped by the things they experienced, as well as like chemistry. Like, okay, maybe we're not having sex on the page, maybe we're it's only a romantic subplot, but you don't want people to read your romantic subplot and be like, I mean, I guess, or to not have any kind of emotional response to it, because then it's superfluous, right? It doesn't do anything for the story because nobody feels anything and it doesn't seem to add anything. And so really looking at how chemistry is created between two people who are different and who have overlaps and who have been shaped by these different forces, but now come together and are better together. Those are like romance does it best, because that's what romance does. That's the specialty that romance like that's the romance special. That's what people come to it for. And so that's something that I really, really love about studying romance myself, as well as pointing my clients to it to help them understand how to really create a compelling romantic subplot. Again, if they're not writing romance as a genre, because if you can write your regular genre stuff, whatever it is that you're writing, and you have a romantic subplot, but you can suffuse it with that energy and that level of connection, and tie it all in with your genre plot, it's going to lift the whole thing and give it so much more, right? So many more layers and so much more depth, and give it that just extra like, because there's nothing like a good romantic subplot, right? Even if you're right, you think about Ninth House with Alex and Darlington, and it's slow burn. And I'm hoping it resolves, because the third one hasn't come out at the time of this recording. I'm pretty sure I know where it's going. They've got to end up together. If they don't, there will be riots in the street. But but the way that like those parts of the story like just make you feel like, oh, I want more of that thing, and I want to see this through, and it keeps you pulling forward. Or even I think Vin and Ellen, right? Every time we show up to a ball, we can't wait to see them on the page together and how they're going to interact with each other. And so it's such an important skill. And again, romance owns that skill. And so it's a great place for, and again, this is why we switch off books, and it's like, even if you're not writing romance, we're talking to you, right? Even if you're not writing fantasy, we're talking to you, because this applies to you as well. And so that's why I always look forward to doing our romance picks, because I think they're really great opportunities for that kind of exploration. So I'm excited. I've already started it. I'm enjoying it.
Well, and I also think the thing that romance does really well, and it's not unique to romance, but I think because it's such a vital part, is transformation on the page, right? The transformation of your character from where they started being operating almost fully from a sense of protecting their wound to addressing it so that they can be in a place to wholeheartedly accept love, is kind of how I always say it. Like, you want it to be where they addressed that thing that sort of kept that wall up, and it is a vital part of that transformation and of the story. So what happens is you really get to see it on a page, and when you understand how that sort of moves and how to insert that in a story, you can operate in any genre and still bring that sense of transformation to your story. And because it's almost in every single story, I mean, why not have fun of the chandelier swinging at the same time, right? You get all the bells and whistles all at the same time. And so you get to see both. And so it'll be, listen, I have learned to just put the book out there, get to enjoy that I get to partake in one of my favorite books, for the sake of saying I need to read it for the podcast. You know what I'm saying?
It's not a bad deal.
It's not at all. And so it'll be great. It'll be a great addition. And I haven't, now what I will say, I need to check into it. I personally have not listened to the audiobook. I always read the paperback of this book just because it's a favorite for me. So I may do that differently this time. Because I've never done the audiobook for this particular book. I always just read it. Yeah. Because it's one of my favorites. But yeah. So that's what we have coming up next month.
Yay!
Which, I mean, for you listening to this, it's next week. So
yeah. You better pick up your copy and get going. Chop, chop.
Go grab your copy.
Chop, little
get
onion.
on it. Did you say chop, little onion?
That's Joe Bennett from The Office. She's from Tallahassee, Florida, and she has all these fun turns of phrase. That's one of the ones that she goes, chop, little onion.
Oh my word. I've never heard that before. Now I have. So with that said, we hope that you guys are ready and that you are chomping at the bit to dive into this Regency romance. It's, again, Tempt Me at Twilight by Lisa
Kleypas.
There we go.
Kleypas. Kleypas.
You know it, if she spells it every time.
I'm going to go full spelling bee.
Oh my gosh. Don't do it. If you spell it every single time, I'm going to be so done. But you know what?
No.
If I don't have to say it, spell away. Listen.
See, you can't say things like that to me because you know it makes me want to do it.
I know.
You know it gets that little imp part of my brain that's like, then I should definitely do it, right?
Oh my gosh. I guess that means I'm gonna be looking for a podcast where somebody says it, so you won't have to spell it every week. Oh my gosh. So with that said, let's go ahead and dive into this week's discussion. We have our editor's takes for Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. And this is a Rachel selection.
If you couldn't guess by the the length of the book, the cover, the descriction, you know.
Well, we can't say that because my books have been long too.
That's true.
Not as long as yours, but
again, Things We Never Got Over was like 18 hours, so it clocked in close by.
Yeah, it did. But I think that was the only one that was that long.
Yeah, I think so. I think one of our other picks is going to come in close.
3 to 4. Yeah. I mean, most of them are probably over 300 pages or right at 300, but not like that one was like 5.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
or
yeah.
Something like that.
It's a hefty book.
Yes, It is. We got to love it. I love it, though. I low-key wanted to suggest we skip 2 and go straight to 3.
Okay, I don't blame you. I feel that. But also, I'm like, for podcast reasons, I'm like, can we do that?
Yes.
Are we allowed to do that?
Who's going to tell us we can't?
But I would be really curious to revisit it because that was the one that I read first because I was looking for something for a client. 3.
All 3. Okay.
And I would be really curious to read it again now that I've read the other, like actually read it in order, the previous 2.
Yeah, I mean, we should consider it. We did all 3 of the books in our book club so we could read the whole series. I get why like 2 is not, I don't think it's the strongest one, but I think it is a different take. Yeah. We're talking about the Knock 'Em Out series, that the second book is a very interesting take, but I do think 1 and 3 are the strongest books for me personally. But reading them all together just gives you a nice, well-rounded picture. So, yeah. So with that said, before we go down another rabbit hole, we are going to jump in and get the summary for Spinning Silver and then dive into our sort of closing editor's takes as we close out this discussion. So go ahead, Rachel. Take it away.
I'm on it. All right. In this Rumpelstiltskin-inspired fairy tale, Miriam is a moneylender's daughter living in a small town near Lithfuss, where Starrick raiders and lengthening winters threaten to bring ruin to palace and peasant alike. Her soft-hearted father refuses to collect repayment, plunging the family into poverty and forcing Miriam to take over the family business. There's nothing magical about Miriam's keen eye for business, turning silver into gold, until she catches the attention of a Starrick king, and Miriam is wrapped up in a conflict of czars, demons, and Starrick. Caught between 2 worlds and the conflict between them, Miriam must fight to protect her family, her people, and choose whether she's going to be a pawn or a queen.
So now that we have this summary, Rachel, what are some of the things that you like for us to sort of examine in this final episode?
Yeah, some of my big takeaways from this story is going to be, number 1, talking about POVs earning their place and how essential this is in creating your own story. Number 2, I want to talk about some of the tools and mechanisms that we use to actually help a reader understand and sympathize with a character, especially a POV character. And then lastly, just revisiting what we talked about during plot, which was exposing characters to genuine hardship, forcing them to make genuinely difficult decisions, and escalating the stakes without people dying. And this is sort of a connection back to even a conversation we had previously of escalating stakes does not necessarily mean we have to start killing people. It doesn't have to be Game of Thrones where people are just getting it all over the, like getting it in a bad way, all over the place. And understanding what escalating stakes can really look like. So those are my three big ones. Dana, what do you have on your list that you want to hit today as some of our big points and takeaways?
I feel like you covered all of them. So I'll be probably coming on the tail end. I also had the just bringing back most of mine are sort of repeats of what I've said before because I just felt like it were important to me, which was the multi-point of view, not turning it into information dumps. That really, about each point of view adding tension or meaning to the story. And we've talked about that quite a bit, but I think bringing it home and then being able to go back to the character episode is a great sort of pairing. Also, I have theme embedding and how she used themes to really address some of the systems that were at play in the story. So we see that, she talks about different structures that they have to navigate: debt, marriage, political hierarchy, magical rules. These are all things that she addressed through themes, and it really allowed the readers to experience the way that these systems were set up and how it affected the characters. And so, I think we did talk about this at length, which is it's just more powerful when you're talking about something like certain themes that we're experiencing them. And the way that she did it is not just experiencing it through one POV. We experience it through, let's say, the main three, but we even see it through others because there were other points of view. And then the final thing that I sort of talked about quite a bit in the plot episode that I want to bring back, which is beautiful writing versus a compelling story. And this is really about like having that balance between the written word that you have on the page, but also having it structured in such a way that it keeps readers turning the page. That we sort of don't want to just take it for granted that just because it's written beautifully that's going to hold on to readers. And I will say that the more that we've discussed it, which is why it's really great to discuss great books, I see where more was done than I was giving it 100% credit for when we had the first discussion. But mainly because when I was reading, I was like, all right, already. So here it's like, do both. Beautiful words, but also moving it forward. And part of that is when we talk about the stakes, talking about those decisions, making those decisions and making them really count. And those are ways that you can do that. But I think being very intentional about it. And here, I just feel like it just went on a little bit longer than I would have wanted, because that will help too, sort of closing that out and really thrusting us, in this case, into the second act would have done wonders for that. And I'm sure I have a couple of other notes, but those are my main things that I have, those three topics that I would like to discuss. So go ahead and kick us off, because I feel like mine are going to fold around yours pretty well, of talking about like the POV earning its place.
Yeah, so I think the strongest aspect of this book is the three primary points of view that we follow, right? We have Wanda, we have Miriam, we have Irina. And those are the primary, Miriam being our primary protagonist, and then Wanda and Irina being our primary sort of like supporting cast. And the avenues through which we explore the story's themes in the deepest and most meaningful ways. And so those three POVs are again, they're the strongest part of the story. And we do have some other POVs, and again, we talked about this at length in plot. And the point is not really to belabor the conversation that we had in plot, but we do get a lot. We do get several. A lot is maybe too strong of a word, but we do get quite a few POVs outside of those three. And I don't like, they didn't always add as much as I think like just following those three primary points of view. Now, I'm not gonna, like, Naomi Novik is a consummate professional. I'm not gonna tell her how to do her job. But, and again, she didn't ask me. But I think that this does bring home a very specific point that I often have to talk through and work through with new writers. Because what's really easy to do is reach for an additional POV. You're like, well, I got to get this information across somehow. Well, I got, they need to know this thing, or I want them to see this thing. And start like, and the first thing that they reach for will be an additional POV. But every POV really needs to, just like you said, right, contribute to the narrative momentum, fit within your themes. Like every time you shift a POV, right, you're asking the reader to fit into the head of somebody new. And that's not as seamless as maybe you would think when you're writing it, right? You write and you're like, all right, we're in this person's head, and we're in a head, and it's like, and you sort of like are happy to move around, but the reader gets a little bit of like a start stop, right? Every time you get into a new head of a character that whose head we have not been in yet. And we're like, who are you? When did you get here? Like, what, and because because this is sort of a common thing that I see where we jump for getting a new POV, I really challenge, and I would challenge, any writer doing multi-POV to really fight for every single point of view of like, why is this here? What is it contributing to the story? What are my primary points of view, and can I achieve this through the points of view I have already established with the reader we are going to be walking in? Because in that first act, you're establishing, right, and we talked about this in plot, we established the cadence of what to expect with our POVs, with the story, the general rhythm of the story. And you really, I would encourage you to think twice before you deviate from that rhythm that you've established with your readers, because again, it creates that kind of start stop, and we're like, well, why are we in this person's head? And we have to sympathize with a new person, and we're right, like, it's just, and so being really aware of what are your primary POVs in the story. What do you establish in your first act of the people we are going to be spending the most time with? Have you established a precedent that we will move outside of those particular POVs? And then when you're thinking about introducing a new POV, really asking yourself, why am I introducing this POV? What is it adding to the story? Can I communicate this information through a point of view I already have? And those are just, again, really stress testing those points of view to make sure that we're not just jumping into heads because it's an expedient tool. And that's something that I would, again, our three primary POVs in this story are amazing. And we feel some of the scuff when we go into different POVs. Now, I think that she still made those POVs wonderfully sympathetic. They had very much their own voices, but the strongest part was our three primary ones, which is why if you're studying this book, I would be very aware of that and not take that necessarily as, yes, I should definitely do this. Naomi Novik can do what Naomi Novik wants to do. If you do not have a strong established reputation and a readership who knows you and who trusts you, right? Like, you need to be more careful with those things, because you are more likely to lose people when they don't already know and trust you.
Mm-hmm. I would say ditto, and we talked about this quite a bit, and you said some questions for them to ask them, the author to ask themselves, and I'll add a couple more. Does this new perspective increase tension and deepen the story? I think one of the things that I found is, like, if you would have picked one of the other point of views that we were already currently in, it would have been harder. It definitely would have been harder to convey some of that other information. So we're not discounting that at all. And it's sort of the second question that I have was, or does it exist because the author needed a new way to show something happening somewhere else? And that is not a reason to pick another POV. So here is one of those studies of, like, determining that. And what you may find is, I need that information. So how can I do it within my established cast that I have. And
Mm-hmm.
this may be you stretching yourself, you finding another scene, you finding another moment. But I would be very intentional about that, because what it will also do is strengthen the characters that you do have.
Yeah.
And I like to think of it a lot of times of like, if you have 100, you have 100%, you can't get any more than that. And you are divvying it up between
Mm-hmm.
all the people, you get no more. So
Yeah.
the more that you sort of take it away from all of those smaller ancillary for a couple of moments that you threw it in there, you could have strengthened one of those core three and really rooted and established them even more, especially for some of those offshoot moments where we learned about some of the magic, some
Yeah.
of the history
Mm-hmm.
that we could have had. And so I think that would have just been helpful. So to me, yeah, I think that was that. I don't have anything else to add to that other than do your due diligence, and you will find sometimes some books like this that will have it, but it doesn't just give it as a do this exactly this way. If you start seeing
Yeah.
more than a few in fantasy and in romance, if you see more than two, right, like you like start reading in other places and start looking at like what is the norm. And then once you establish that cadence, did you introduce how what they can expect by that first act break? Because
Mm-hmm.
anything that you throw in later, or another person that you throw in later, you're disrupting, and you can
Yep.
become a part of the noise instead of a part of the clarity. And you're asking not just for people to reacclimate themselves, but you also are asking them to pause and think, and not in a good way,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we be like, wait a minute, who is this again? Like,
Yeah.
the moment we do the scrape of our hand and our face bunches up, you
Yeah.
have you have a possibility of losing us. And
Mm-hmm.
so you just want to be mindful of that. And so with that said, I think that goes right into some, again, a lot of this is attaching to characters, but I think it's because of the way this story is structured. It really is character driven.
Yeah.
So talking a little bit about the tools and mechanisms for creating empathetic characters.
Yeah, the one of the best things that you can do, and I've started noticing this increasingly in novels, is one of the best things you can do to help us understand and sympathize with the character, right? We may not find a character inherently relatable, right? Where it's like, okay, this is not my life. I can't necessarily find my life in this. But there is a sense of human experience that we can sort of resonate with. But then really one of the best tools that you have at your disposal is helping us to understand a character. So we may not agree, we may be like, I would do it differently, but I get it, right? And so the way that a character solves problems, and taking advantage of the fact, specifically with your POV characters, taking advantage of the fact that you are in their head. So not taking anything for granted, but really saying, okay, this character, based on everything that I know about them, how do they size up a situation? What do they prioritize when they are between a rock and a hard place? What is the thing that in this moment is most important to them? And so what happens is, so first of all, this is kind of a plot thing, right? Where you have to expose your characters to problems. You have to give them problems to solve. And then in their POV, help us to understand, like, and this is like literally like in your narration, in POV, how are they assessing this problem? What do they see at work? And what is their solution for navigating the problem? Because that is where this helps you establish a little bit of competency, so it doesn't feel like your protagonist just makes decisions because the plot needs them to do that thing, right? When we actually take advantage of the fact that we are in their mind and we can see how they're working through a problem and saying, okay, this is how I'm going to try to solve this problem. And like for to this particular end, to protect this thing, to avoid this outcome, whatever that thing is, that tells us more about them than almost anything else you can do. And
Mhm.
utilizing that so that we can understand your characters deeply and never feel like they are just, again, they're making choices because the plot needs to go in a certain direction. And that really, it also gives them depth and layers. And again, we talked extensively in characters about the fact that each of our primary three female leads, Miriam, Wanda, and Irina, could have come across as very unlikable because of the way that they handle certain situations. But because we see that their handling of the situation is deeply rooted in an honest assessment of a really crappy situation, a rock in a hard place, we get it and we understand why they do what they do, and it makes them very, like, we connect with them deeply. And so part of that is exposing them to problems and then taking advantage of the fact that you're in their point of view, and really, again, like, using that to filter through how do they see the world, what do they see when they see the situation, what do they see when they see the people in front of them, right? And letting that be specific to the character so that they really become sort of fully realized to us. They feel real to us because they actually have their own unique perspective that dictates the way that they move in the world. And this story is an amazing example of that.
Mm-hmm. Um, First of all, I have very little to add to that. I think that's dead on. And what you're talking about is, at the end of the day, you're showing us versus then telling us,
Mm-hmm.
right? I always like to look at, like, when it comes to characters, what do they say? What do they do? How do they think? Just
Yep.
like you do with people, right?
Yeah.
If somebody tells you one thing, but you see them act differently, you are side-eyeing every single thing that they have ever done, right? You just
Yes.
are. And so, not only here as how you look at your protagonist, but even more so your antagonist. She did a
Mm-hmm.
great job with that. Right.
Yeah.
Because if you can get to a point where you almost like, okay, I wouldn't have done it, but I understand kind of how,
Mm-hmm.
that makes you have more
Oof.
of, it's almost like it's an inherent stakes that you are
Mm-hmm.
creating versus this sort of
Yep.
external. It's just inherent because of that rub. And so one of the other things that I'll add is, you said that sometimes that makes them that could have made them unlikable. And I think sometimes, to me, it wasn't just that they could have been unlikable, because I don't know if I thought they were all potentially unlikable, but it could make them unrelatable, right? And
Yeah.
sometimes it's because of the degree of difference. So it's about finding things that are universal. I think this is one of those reasons why you always have people that have, issues with their mom, issues with their
Mm-hmm.
dad, because we can all relate to that in some way,
Mm-hmm.
even if we didn't come to the same conclusion. Having a level
Yeah.
of understanding for why makes a difference in how we lean into the experience. And I think there's something so special about, once you trust the author in how they share that information, how you then sort of give them creative license
Mm-hmm.
and you accept what they're saying, and you don't do a lot of external input into what they're giving you as their output, because you
Yeah.
trust in how they've delivered that. So as the story unfolds, the way you set that up in act 1, you sort of like, okay, I can fall back
Mm-hmm.
and just read this. And I think
Yeah.
that's one of those things, is like, even if it's that they're not unlikable, it's sometimes they're unrelatable, but both of those things are solved with the same thing. What are
Yeah.
they saying? What are they doing? How do they think? And are you showing that on the page? And it's not about them doing info dumps or even a whole lot of dialogue sometimes, but it's
Yeah.
this combination of how they're showing up on the page, how they reason through and problem solve, and how does that align with who they say they are when they
Yeah.
are speaking. And that's how you begin to sort of have that character clearly displayed. And we're also showing how they're transforming, because as you move through the story, those are the things that are changing
Yeah.
based upon what they're experiencing. And so essentially we're experiencing like who they are, and we're showing it through their actions. And I think that is like 100%. And another aspect of this that I think sort of piggybacks on one of the elements that I wanted to talk about is, she's showing that also thematically, not
Mm-hmm.
just them as a person, that each one of them sort of represented arena, where you could have said that was a person of means. You could have said Marina, she was they were financially okay, if you would have thought about it based on her grandfather and where they could have been had it
Yeah.
not been for her father's maybe in some ways it could have been naivety in him being naive, or in others just having a kind heart,
Yeah.
maybe. So his choices. And Myra, oh, I keep wanting to call her
Miriam?
Myra. Miriam, thank you. I keep wanting to call her Myra. Anyways, her, how she sort of like picks up the mantle in a way and sort of almost gives the family the footing that they would have had the father done what he
Yeah.
was supposed to do. And it all almost in some ways offset the fact that they were Jews and they were sort of in this community where they were outsiders. And
Yeah.
so it kind of was looked at in multiple ways. But the great part about all of this is so she put it on the page and we saw how she wrestled with it and how she
Yeah.
wrestled with her family regarding it. And then lastly, we had Wanda that she technically could have been on the inside like her father is from time to time, but because of their economic status
Yeah.
and the status of their family, that sort of put them on the outskirts. So it's just all of these things were communicated in multiple passes so that we understood exactly what we were getting ourselves into, and that we then become what? Invested.
Yeah.
And the moment we come invested in their transformation and in seeing what happens, what's going to happen to Wanda?
Yeah.
You know, is she going to pay off her debt? You know, is she going to get away? You know, like
Yeah. Is
all
her
of
dad
these,
gonna find out about the money? Like,
all of
yeah.
this. And then once that happens, you have us. You
Yeah.
have us hooked. So yes, totally. And so so we see this for Naomi did a great job of then allowing us to then see the world through how they process things like debt, marriage, politics, the magic, even the relationships between women, the familiar relationships, and even the thing of like questions of career and access and status and all the things that were done in order to achieve or to withhold that from others. And all of that is helping us to define character, develop the world, and you're doing it all simultaneously using these, mechanisms.
Yeah. And, one of the things that this is kind of just an aside, but there's also this aspect of like belonging that happens in the story. Cause it only, just as you were talking about it, like Miriam and her family are outsiders to the family not to the family, to the town because they're Jews. And when you mentioned it, it just like occurred to me like, oh yeah, her dad, her grandpa lives in Visnia. Visnia has a whole Jewish community that they are apart from. Right, that they are like, and instead they're kind of in this like podunk outpost where they're the only Jews in town, and they sure feel like it, But then Wanda also, right, she has no real home because of her home life and the way that these people kind of like find each other and create a sense of belonging, and the fact that like Miriam's belonging when they go to Visnia and they're able to be with other Jews, and they pull Wanda with them, right? They pull her and her brothers into that life, and so you're also getting, again, you get all these different angles on what it means to belong and what community means and family, and you get to see it. And that's what really strengthens it, right? Is you really strengthen a point and you strengthen a theme not by telling us repeatedly, but by showing us from different angles, letting us see different facets of this thing, because things are always complex. That's life. That's people. It is complicated out here. And getting to see it from different angles so that you can kind of go deep and see sort of like more of a 360-degree view of a thing rather than trying to belabor just, and pound on one thing repeatedly. That's beleaguering something versus really exploring it and giving it a chance to be all that it could be, which I think she really does in this story.
Absolutely. And what we end up seeing is sort of like in this story, there's so much. Like you see How do you interpret value,
Mm-hmm.
price,
Yeah.
power,
Oh,
transformation, all of that. And you see it through action and consequences. You see
mm-hmm.
both the pro and the con of it, when it works out in your favor and when it doesn't. And this is not something that we talked about, but I'll say this before we get to your last point. I think it's also something to be said when you have this level of interaction and engagement in a story based on the length. And so, what can usually happen to people who are wanting to be in this current market, and the stories now are longer. They are longer when it comes to novels. And so it's like you just want to balloon it and keep repeating the same things. And no, it's the fact that you have the opportunity to show things evolving and
Yeah.
transforming, and you can show things from different perspectives. So here
Mm-hmm.
we have the point of views and their different stages in life, and then what happens when they're in this same proximity,
Yeah.
and when you have it where they're in a non-magical capacity versus a magical capacity. And it
Yeah.
really does allow you to give the totality of us of an experience, so that
Yeah.
we get to live through that story. And I think that's
Yeah.
when you sort of get to see all of these things operating at once, and it makes for a great story.
Yeah.
So this makes me think about your last point that you wanted us to talk about, which is, the fact that the characters experiencing hardships and decisions without, keep saying without killing people. And I think the murder mystery person in her crime storyteller. Um, I think it goes well with where we are now, because that's another part. Because since we didn't have a lot of boom, bam, pow, yeah, that's what I say. Where whenever you think about external, I think a lot of people always think of physical action,
Mm-hmm.
but you
Yeah.
still have to have it for an external plot to be there. You have to have action in a way of, in this case, a lot of times is like decisions being made, movement, both in physical movement, but as in the evolving of the storyline through those consequences for the choices that they make, and being very, very, very intentional about the choices that you have, because that provides those escalating stakes in the conflict. So, yeah, tell us more about that and sort of how we're seeing it here. Because I think this is a crucial part of this story and the way that it moves, and gave her time to get to a lot of the more physical action, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. So, we always talk about escalating stakes because it's a story essential, but understanding the avenues by which you can escalate stakes, right?
Hmm.
A problem becoming increasingly personal or getting closer to home, that is an escalation of stakes before your family comes to harm. But the closer your family gets to harm, the higher the stakes are, because if the harm is here or if your family's here and the harm's getting closer, right? That's creating that tension of, how do I keep my family away from this? How do I solve this problem? And so we don't. And I think part of it too is, this is meant to feel like a fairy tale, and so that means that there are certain things that we don't necessarily want. We don't want characters we love dying, because that's kind of outside of the fairy tale feel of the story. But that doesn't mean that the characters won't be put through their paces to get to the end of the story, right?
Hmm.
And so by exposing, Miriam to the fact that not only is her family experiencing prejudice, but they're being taken advantage of, and her mom's life is on the line because of that poverty. And Wanda basically gets like hired off because her dad has debts that he's not paying back, right? But then all of a sudden she starts to realize, this is my ticket out, right? And when she realizes that maybe she can get out of this thing, not getting caught, getting paid becomes this sort of goal, right, that she starts to pursue. And so the closer, so when for example her brothers start to find out what she's actually doing, those stakes go up for her, because the more people know, the more chance it is that it gets back to her dad and ruins everything. And having gotten one glimpse at her home life, and we are like, yeah, those are stakes, right? Like the life that she's living now, like going back to that, those are stakes. And so we see the different forms of harm that become possible and that are that come close and sometimes touch our characters. And even when they, and this is one of the things I think the story excels at as well, is like even when they are confronted with the problem and they're like, whoa, this could get really bad, and they solve that problem, the solution that they have to undertake to solve that problem, even if it's like, oh, good thing this thing didn't happen, we solved that, the solution still had consequences that now they have to deal with, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned in a previous episode, right, the cause and effect chain. So it's like this thing happened, so we have to make this decision, but because we made this decision, this thing happened, so that even so that at no point we stop taking the story seriously in terms of, we never feel like, oh, well, of course it's going to work out because reasons, because the author wants this character to stay alive, or, you know, that we didn't, whatever, or we had another near miss, right? This is, it's consequences that make us take the events in the story seriously, where we actually believe that like there's real risk and those stakes feel real to us. And so, like I said, even when there's a solution to a problem, that solution has consequences that they then have to deal with after that. And that's how you can keep pushing that story and escalating those stakes on your characters, and nobody necessarily has to die. And it's because of the like the personal relationship to the conflict that characters have and the risk that they're incurring by continuing to pursue a solution to this problem, and the proximity to danger that they or the thing they're trying to protect, right, increasingly get toward. And those consequences are what keep us feeling like their decisions matter and the stakes feel real to us.
Yeah, and the fact that you and we know how they interpret that, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
what it means to one character isn't the same as what it means to another character. And
Yeah.
that's where what we talked about before is so crucial, because understanding why they don't want this thing to happen. And when we see
Mm-hmm.
them in a situation where X, Y, and Z is right in front of them and they have to
Yeah.
decide, you know, am I going to go through it, or am I going to turn around?
Yeah.
Another thing that I will say, that I sort of had as a sort of outlier that I didn't mention, but I want to mention here because you said it. I think that was one of the things that was sort of good about hearing that this was sort of a retelling. When you think of fairy tale, you don't necessarily think about what's going on with Wanda, right?
Yeah.
You don't think. So when that happens, you're like, wait a minute, whoa, wait a minute. Like, what's going on here? And you are very aware, and your heart immediately is like activated, because it's like, wait, what just happened? And not in an extreme kind of way, but it
Mm-hmm.
is in a way that gives the story depth, and it gives
Mm-hmm.
it nuance from her unique perspective. And I
Yeah.
think that's a part of this as well. Like when you're starting to look at what those decisions are, where you start, they should never be at that point. It should get progressively worse. And she did an
Yeah.
amazing job of that.
Yeah.
Amazing job of that. Even to some points, I was like, oh my gosh, what is good? Like,
There are some tough scenes in there.
oh my word.
Oh.
Listen, and I'll be talking to myself. My husband is like, are you talking to yourself? Yes, I am. I want to know why. but but you want to be mindful of this, and you want to look at it, especially when you have a story that doesn't have a lot of those that external plot thrusting sort of vibe, or
Mm-hmm.
it's but that you are getting progressively worse. And so being able to pull back from your story and look at how that thread progresses and what would be meaningful for that character, what would be seen as success, what would be seen as
Yeah.
failure, what is motivating them, and are you putting those things at risk? You
Yeah.
know, it's
That's
like
so good.
all of that is what is going to give a story like this heart. It's going to give it the conflict, the stakes. It's going to keep us reading.
Yeah.
And but it only works if we know that,
Yeah.
because that is what helps us to define the meaning of what's happening to them. And I don't
Yeah.
think at any time did we ever question what was at stake at all.
Yeah.
And I think that again made it really sort of bring all these other things home, but it also kept us, and it made us empathize. It made us see
Yeah.
how the story was going to evolve. And at some points, listen, they didn't kill people, but it was like, whew,
They're not getting off scot-free neither.
listen. And there was other points I was just like, this is crazy. What just happened? I just kept rewinding. I kept rewinding, like, I gotta listen to this again. Maybe I missed something. But I think it's so important that when you have something that has this many threads, like her management of it was so good.
Yeah.
Even with throwing in all the extra POVs that I don't think we necessarily needed, she
Yeah.
still did that well. So even that was done well. And so
Yeah.
I really, really enjoyed that. My final point, and I think we're sort of talking about this right now, and is like, yes, you want beautiful writing, you want beautiful prose, but you also want to make sure that you're balancing that with the structure, like that it pulls readers forward. And I did mention this in our plot episode, and I'm just restating it now because you've already heard it, but I still really think that the first act could have been cut a little bit shorter. But as we moved into it and she set the stage and she set the groundwork, it rolled.
Yeah.
For such a long, I mean, this story is a pretty meaty story. I think it's not as long as our longest. I think Mistborn has been our longest so far. But it was a pretty lengthy story. And so the fact that once you got on the other side of Act One, it was moving. But I will say that, making sure that you're balancing it. And in this case, almost all of that first act was really about the dynamics between the characters. We didn't
Mm-hmm.
have a whole lot of outside sort of pressure or influence directly, the way it sort of picked up after that. But just making sure that you're maintaining both beauty and momentum. Like, we want to keep it moving. You don't want to just take for granted that people are just going to be fascinated if you don't give them something to be fascinated by. So whether it's developing the empathy, developing characters that are relatable so that you want to see what happens to them, having moments where you are having questions that sort of have open loops in our minds that we want to see resolved, so that ties us into the story, and utilizing some of those things to make sure that we have that momentum throughout the story from page one on is going to always help to ensure that you get people that are invested and that you are endearing readers to you as a storyteller, that they can trust you with the story, so that when they finish that book, they're going to want to go to the next one, or they were going to want to go to the previous one, because they want more of what you're writing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So with that said, when you pull back, is there anything else that you feel like we should kind of add as we close out our discussion about Spinning Silver?
Honestly, there's so many things that we could talk about. We tried to pick the high impact heavy hitters, but I think that this is a great one to look at. Again, for multi POV, deeply sympathetic characters, really putting your characters through their paces, right? Making them work for it, doing really using your themes and using the plot to illuminate and explore them rather than to just sort of repeatedly rehash them. And it does, beautiful writing versus narrative momentum is very important, but it does have some really beautiful writing. She writes great prose, I think. And it's interesting because she does have very they're very voicey POVs. So Wanda being, especially at the beginning, she is illiterate. And so the way that her chapters read are kind of very stilted, like Wanda's kind of character in her, the way that she like processes the information. And it sort of smooths out a little bit
Over
more
time.
as like time
Yeah.
progresses, which
Hmm.
is just that is just a fascinating progression to watch. But this is I think this is such a great one to just to experience as a reader. And then if you're, you know, a writer who's interested in literally any of those things on that list, that you can really get a lot out of.
Yeah, and I would say like you will want to allocate reading this a couple times.
Mm-hmm.
If you really want to be able to uh, glean like the best parts of it,
Yeah.
I always tell readers like if I mean clients like if you are really finding a book that you want to study, you want to read it at least 2 to 3 times at a
Yeah.
minimum.
Minimum.
This
Yes.
one probably even more because especially when you get to the magic, we didn't even touch on the fact that she's bringing in some of their history, at
Mm-hmm.
the Jewish history. We
Yeah.
didn't even touch on uh, objects being utilized. We
Mm-hmm.
talked about it for a
Oh.
brief second, but objects being utilized, and that was a really sort of a tangible, literal tangible ring, crown,
Mm-hmm.
you know, these things. We did say about the transformation of silver to gold in general,
Mm-hmm.
but and even sort of the progression of power as these women ascend, and the fact
Oh,
that each
so
one of them
good.
is different, so you get all three levels of that. It really is something that can be studied. And I will say this, I think it's a very interesting sort of consideration because it was done on the landscape of the Jewish community, that it could
Mm-hmm.
be even looked at the way you would look at something like an African American story if you wanted to bring in historical elements in a
Yeah.
fantasy landscape, not in it being you know, apple for apple, but how you could
Mm-hmm.
potentially do it without
Yeah.
it being alienating as a thematic element of a story, right? It
Yeah.
was just folded in really beautifully. And I
Yeah.
thought that she did a great job with that, which I think this is the first time that I'm saying that. And so I think it will be a great job of that, especially being that she's pulling it into a fantasy. So I think this is one of those stories that you could find yourself reading over and over again easily and still enjoying the story. And the audiobook did a great job, at least to me. Yeah, I know I listened to it kind of fast, but I thought the audiobook did a good job of it
Oh,
as
that the
well.
narrator is amazing. She
Yes.
single-handedly covers every POV, every voice. Oh my, and like she
Even the
does
little
every
boy.
POV.
Oh my
Yes, and
gosh.
she does every I was going to say she does every POV fully in a different voice for
Voice.
that character. I that is an astounding work of voice acting. The
Especially
voice
like
actor,
when
she is
Wanda's
amazing.
dad, when she had to do
Oh,
those scenes, I was like,
and also
listen,
honestly in Chernobog as well.
yes. Can I just tell you? I don't know if I should say that. Why was I getting visions of the one movie um with the black thing that comes out of him? Not Spider-Man.
Venom?
Yes, Venom.
I hadn't been, I honestly I had a different picture in my mind entirely, but I respect it.
You know, I don't watch those movies, but when he came, I was like, oh my gosh, that is what I saw. I was like, okay, this is getting a little creepy. Exactly. And when he would just come out like, whoa, and that dude was like, okay, if you're not watching this, you're missing out on the special effects. We're big budget over here.
Always big budget.
Awesome. So, is there anything else we need to cover before we bounce, Rachel?
No, ma'am. We covered as much as one could conceivably cover in 4 episodes that are even extra meaty, extra juicy. So,
I totally agree. So, with that said, thank you so much for joining us as we talked about spinning silver. We hope that you have enjoyed this. If you missed any of it, you can always go back and listen to the previous episodes. We are looking forward to you joining us for our next book, which is Tempt Me at Twilight. and that will be starting next week. So you have time to grab your copy and join us. You can find out more information about us by visiting us online at storydeepdive.com. And if you haven't done so already, don't forget to comment, rate, like wherever you are, heart. I don't know where you see this at. Wherever you are, engage with it. Help your girls out. And definitely let us know how you are enjoying the book selections. We will be back same place, same time next week. Take care, and as always, happy writing. Goodbye.